Welcome to another deep dive with us. This time, we're going hyperlocal, really going to dig into the nitty-gritty of New York City politics. Talking about a single meeting of the NYC Council. But trust me, this isn't your average, boring government meeting.
You'd be surprised how much drama can unfold when the fate of legislation, real-life issues that affect people every day, hangs in the balance.
And that's what we're here to uncover.
You're right.
Not just what happened on this particular day, but what these events tell us about how power actually works in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about power dynamics, political maneuvering, the subtle tactics, all the stuff that shapes the lives of everyday New Yorkers.
And the crazy thing is, our sources for this deep dive are two documents that most people would find about as interesting as watching paint dry. We've got the official meeting agenda from January 30th, 2024, and then the detailed minutes from that same meeting.
And those minutes, they're where the real story unfolds. They give us a glimpse into the alliances, the undercurrents of tension, the strategies at play. It's like reading a political thriller, only this one's all real.
Okay, so before we get into the weeds of this specific meeting, let's do a quick level set for our listeners who maybe aren't glued to the news out of City Hall every day. What exactly is the NYC Council, and what do they actually do?
So think of the city council as, well, the legislative branch of city government. They're the ones who write and pass laws, approve the budget. They essentially hold the mayor's feet to the fire when it comes to making sure things actually get done.
And to be clear, we're talking about the mayor of New York City here, not some other mayor.
That's right, the big cheese, the head honcho of the 5 boroughs. And here's where it gets interesting. The mayor wasn't physically at this particular meeting, but their presence was definitely felt. It's like a political thriller where the most powerful person in the room isn't even there.
You got to give us something more. Come on. What were these earth-shattering proposals that had everyone so fired up?
2 proposals in particular took center stage on January 30th. They go by the very exciting names of INT, no, 549-2022, and INT, no, 586-2022A.
Riveting stuff. But I'm guessing these proposals weren't just about, like, renaming a park or something, right?
No, not at all. These dealt with some hot-button issues, solitary confinement in city jails and police transparency. We're talking about stuff that gets people really fired up.
Yeah, I can imagine. Those aren't exactly light dinner conversation topics. So walk us through it. What was the goal of each proposal?
Okay, so INTET, 549-2022A, the solitary confinement one. The goal there was to essentially ban the practice in city jails, or at least severely limit its use, and establish stricter rules for other types of restrictive housing. The idea was to make the system more humane, reduce the potential for psychological harm.
Makes sense. And what about the police transparency bill? I'm guessing that one probably ruffled some feathers as well.
Oh, you better believe it. This one would have required the NYPD to provide much more detailed data on police stops, the whens, wheres, and whys of their interactions with civilians.
Trying to shed some light on potential biases in policing. Gotcha. Okay, so we've got these 2 proposals, both addressing complex, potentially controversial issues. And this is where the mayor's invisible hand comes into play, right?
Exactly. Remember how I said the mayor wasn't physically at the meeting, but their presence was still felt? Well, before the meeting even started, the mayor decided to use their executive power and veto both of these proposals.
Hold on. So the mayor essentially said, nope, not happening, before the council even had a chance to really hash things out.
You got it. That's the power of the veto, my friend. It's the mayor's way of saying, I disagree, and I'm stopping this from becoming law.
But it sounds like the council wasn't about to just take this lying down.
Not a chance. They decided to hold what are called override votes on both vetoed proposals.
Which is essentially a way of saying, we hear you, Mr. Madam Mayor, but we're not backing down.
Exactly. And that right there, that's where things start to get really interesting.
We're back, and things are about to get real in this city council showdown. Just a reminder, we've got a mayor who's vetoed 2 major pieces of legislation, one dealing with solitary confinement in jails, and the other aiming for more transparency from the NYPD. But the council's not backing down. They're going for the veto override. High stakes.
And this is where those detailed meeting minutes we've got become more than just dry government records, because overriding a mayoral veto, it's not a walk in the park. It takes a supermajority. At least 42 out of the 51 council members have to vote in favor to overturn the mayor's decision.
So each vote carries a lot of weight. It's not just a number. It's representing the voices of all the people in that council member's district. So did they pull it off? Did they get those 42 votes to bring those proposals back from the dead?
The suspense is killing me. Okay, let's cut to the chase. Page 47 of the minutes, that's where the action is. The roll call votes are all laid out there, and what we see is pretty amazing. Both veto overrides passed with a 42-9 vote.
Whoa, 42-9. That's a clear message, not even close. So even with the mayor's opposition, it seems like there was strong support within the council itself for these proposals.
That's exactly what makes this so interesting. This wasn't some nail-biter decided by a handful of votes or some backroom deal. This was a significant chunk of the council taking a stand, publicly disagreeing with the mayor.
Makes you wonder, did the mayor see this coming? Was this a miscalculation or is there something else going on here? Because even though the council voted to override, it doesn't automatically mean those proposals become law, right?
You're catching on. You see, there's another twist in this story. This is where it gets really interesting. Even with the council's override votes, the mayor still has some options, some moves they can make.
Don't tell me there's another level to this. What else could the mayor possibly do?
Well, they could, of course, just accept the council's decision, let the legislation go through, become law. But knowing what we've seen so far, do you really think that's likely?
Okay, probably not. So what's the other option? What's the mayor's next move?
The mayor can, and often does, challenge the council's decision.
Challenge them how? Are we talking about a rap battle on the steps of City Hall?
Not quite a rap battle, but it can get pretty heated. They can take the council to court.
To court. What, like they're going to sue each other?
Yeah. In a way, yeah. They'd be arguing that the legislation is unconstitutional or that the council overstepped their bounds. This is where all those legal documents, the ones we usually gloss over, become the battleground.
So this could turn into a whole legal mess. That's not just political drama anymore. That's taxpayer money going to lawyers. What would a court even look at when deciding something like this?
They'd be looking at precedent, past rulings on similar issues. They'd examine the specific wording in the city charter, the rules that govern how the city operates, trying to figure out the original intent, what those who wrote these rules way back when actually meant. It's a whole other deep dive.
We can spend another 3 episodes just on that. But for now, let's get back to this council meeting. We've got this back and forth between the mayor and the council, this power struggle over who really gets to call the shots in the city. What does this tell us about how things really work in NYC?
It shows you the push and pull that happens in any democracy, especially one as big and complex as New York City's. You've got the mayor elected to lead the city, set the overall direction. Then you've got the council representing the needs of specific communities.
Trying to find that balance, right, between leading and following, pushing your own agenda, but also respecting the process.
Exactly. And in this case, it seems like the council, or at least a good chunk of them, weren't content just going along with what the mayor wanted. They were ready to push back, make their own voices heard.
And let's not forget about Councilmember Yeager, who voted against both overrides. The minutes don't have transcripts of what was actually said, so we're missing out on some potentially juicy political speeches. But there's still some hints in there about their strategy, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's one detail, seems small at first, but it's really revealing. Back on page 17, remember that motion council member Yeager made to decouple one of the items on the agenda?
I'll be honest, that one went right over my head. What does decoupling even mean in this context?
That, my friend, is a fantastic question, and it shows why understanding these little procedural details, they can be just as important as the big policy debates. See, the general orders calendar, that's basically the list of items the council's going to discuss during the meeting. Decoupling one of those items would allow for a separate vote on just one of the veto overrides.
Ah, so instead of voting on both overrides together, they'd be voted on one by one.
You got it. And by separating them, Councilmember Yeager might have been able to sway the vote in their favor on at least one of the proposals. It's all about strategy.
Like a chess game, trying to outmaneuver your opponent.
Exactly. Now, even though that motion ultimately failed, it gives you a glimpse into the kind of thinking, the maneuvering that's going on behind the scenes.
It makes you realize that these minutes, they're not just boring records. They're like a sneak peek into a whole world of political drama.
Well said. And just like any good story, this is really just the beginning. What happens next, how this all plays out in the courts and in the public eye, Well, that's a story for another deep dive.
And we are back for one last look at this NYC Council showdown.
One last look, but the story's far from over.
Definitely not. Because what happens in that council chamber, those votes, those vetoes.
You have real consequences.
Exactly. We're not just talking about abstract political games. It's about solitary confinement, police transparency, issues that affect real people every single day.
Which is why this deep dive matters. It's a glimpse into how power works in the city, the push and pull between those in charge and the people they represent.
It really makes you think. Local government, it's not just about fixing potholes or whatever.
Not at all.
It's about fundamental rights, about justice, about how we treat the most vulnerable people in our communities.
And what we saw in this meeting, the council standing up to the mayor, it shows how important it is for people to be involved, to make their voices heard.
So what can our listeners do? What can anyone do if they want to make a difference?
Well, first, you got to know what's going on. Get familiar with your local representatives, the people elected in your district. Pay attention to what's being debated, the issues affecting your community.
So read those local news sites, go to a community board meeting.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to speak up. Contact your council member. Go to those town halls. Talk to your neighbors. All those small actions, they add up.
Because democracy, it's not a spectator sport, right?
Definitely not. It takes work. It takes participation.
Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's frustrating, but in the end, it matters.
It does.
Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this. What if this whole power struggle, the mayor, the council, the debates over solitary confinement and police oversight, what if it's just the beginning of something even bigger?
A realignment of power in the city.
Exactly. Something to think about as you continue your own deep dive into the heart of New York City.
And until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep digging for those hidden truths, and keep exploring the world around you.